Now, the US Conference of Catholic Bishops has issued a formal apology for the Church's role in mistreatment and trauma inflicted on Native American communities. From 1819 to 1969, a US government program of forced assimilation saw hundreds of thousands of Indigenous American children taken from their families and sent to boarding schools, dozens of which were run by the Catholic Church. Survivors have reported mental, physical, and sexual abuse. Well, in a document released on Friday, the US Conference of Catholic Bishops acknowledged the harm that the Church caused to Native Americans, writing, "The family systems of many Indigenous people never fully recovered from these tragedies, which often led to broken homes harmed by addiction, domestic abuse, abandonment, and neglect." Well, for more, I spoke to Christine Dean-DC McLeave, former CEO of the National Native American Boarding School Healing Coalition. Christine, thank you very much for taking the time and being with us here on BBC News. You are the descendant of boarding school survivors. What does this apology from the US Conference of Catholic Bishops mean to you?
It is an acknowledgement that is a long time coming, but frankly, it doesn't mean anything without any actions behind it.
And in terms of those actions, what is it that you would like to see?
I think that there needs to be a true acknowledgement of the harms that were done. I briefly read through the document, and a lot of what they're talking about is the doctrine of discovery, Spanish conquistadors, and there is no acknowledgement of the real abuses that happened in Catholic Indian boarding schools. And that is a lack of accountability and a lack of true justice.
I know it can, of course, be difficult to talk about some of those abuses, but if you wouldn't mind, could you tell us more about what members of your family, other people in the community have had to endure?
Yes, I've heard many boarding school survivors' stories, and my grandfather, who went to a Catholic Indian boarding school, was subjected to something that's pretty common from survivors to talk about called the belt line, where they had to run down the middle of two rows of students holding belts. Those students were forced to hit the child running down the middle with their belts. And my grandfather was subjected to that same punishment.
I understand there is also concern has been raised about sexual abuse also going on in these boarding schools. Is that something you've heard about talking to people in the community?
Absolutely. My grandfather actually really didn't want to talk about boarding schools and what happened to him there. So I don't know if he experienced sexual abuse, but I have certainly heard many boarding school survivors talk about that. And frankly, it seemed more significant, more prolific within these boarding schools that were run by the Catholic churches and other churches.
So you said that this acknowledgement, it doesn't go far enough, and you would also like to see further actions. Just tell us more about what accountability would look like in your mind.
I think in terms of the Catholic Church holding itself accountable, that is difficult, but there is a way in which they can participate in true justice. I think turning over their records and letting those be shared, participating in the current investigation that is taking place through the Department of the Interior. I think there really needs to be accountability in terms of the abuse that their staff, either nuns or priests, subjected the children to. And right now, all we have is the survivors' accounting. And in some cases, those survivors of abuse are being obstructed from pursuing justice due to special laws, such as the state of South Dakota that has changed its statute of limitations to limit survivors from coming forward. So I think the Catholic Church has a lot of different things that it can do to participate in true justice and accountability.
You spoke about the situation there of your grandfather. More broadly, what is the lasting impact, the generational impact of these abuses?
I hear about it all the time. I'm no longer the executive running this national coalition, I've transitioned my career into another area. I'm a doctoral student, and I'm looking at using psychedelic medicines for healing, particularly in Native American communities. And I see and I hear about boarding school trauma all the time in my current work. It is a fact of life for many of us who are tribal members, Native Americans. We live with this legacy. It impacts every single area of our life because oftentimes boarding schools are talked about as a symbol of colonialism. It's more than just a boarding school experience. It's the fact that boarding schools were used to carry out forced assimilation, forced conversion, genocide, ethnocide, the taking of our way of life, the taking of our language, and making our spiritual ways and practices illegal and demonizing them. And there's just so many impacts that haven't been addressed and that are really impacting our lives and our vitality and our health and our well-being to this day.
In 2020, you were instrumental in writing the Truth and Healing Commission on Indian Boarding School Policy Act. What has the response been to that bill?
The work continues. The bill has been introduced a few different times and is currently in Congress. There are two bills, one in the House and one in the Senate, and we are still hoping to see a national truth commission in this country. Canada had its truth commission, and the United States has yet to have this reckoning, this accounting of what the exact harms were. How many children went to these boarding schools? How many went missing? How many children are buried in these boarding school cemeteries? We deserve to know, and we have a right to know.